All right, so let's get right into it. Victoria is in the middle of this huge energy shift, right? We're moving away from coal and jumping headfirst into renewables. But how do you actually do that? How do you rewire an entire state for a totally new kind of power? Well, that's exactly what the 2025 Victorian Transmission Plan is all about, and we're going to break it all down for you.
So here's what we're going to cover. First up, we'll look at the big problem, the challenge Victoria's grid is facing right now. Then, we'll dive into the main solution they've come up with, these things called renewable energy zones. After that, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of how this new grid is actually going to get built. And finally, and maybe most importantly, we'll talk about what all of this actually means for you.
So first things first, why this massive plan and why now? Well, it really boils down to one simple, kind of stark reality. The power grid we've been relying on for decades, it just wasn't built for the future we're heading into. I mean, just look at this timeline. Victoria has set some seriously ambitious goals. We're talking 95% renewable energy by 2035. And at the same time, the old workhorses of the system, the big coal-fired power plants like Yalern, are shutting down for good. So yeah, the clock is absolutely ticking. The state needs a whole new system, and it needs it fast. Here's a good way to think about it. Imagine the old grid was like a simple road network. It had a few big highways all leading to a couple of massive cities. Those were the coal plants in the Latrobe Valley. Simple, right? But now our power isn't coming from just a few big cities anymore. It's coming from hundreds of smaller towns and villages all over the map, all the wind and solar farms. So the old way of just tacking on a new country road here and there, it's become a total mess, chaotic, inefficient. This new plan is about throwing out that old map and designing a proper, modern, super coordinated highway system for energy. And look, the stakes here are incredibly high. This isn't just some nice-to-have idea. The state's own Minister for Energy and Resources put a number on it. Failing to get this right, to plan it all out strategically, could cost the economy a whopping $9.6 billion. So you can see, this is way more than just an environmental project. It's an absolutely crucial economic one. Okay, so if the big problem is a lack of coordination, what's the big solution? Well, the centerpiece of this whole strategy, the big idea, is something called renewable energy zones. So what on earth is a renewable energy zone, or REZ as you'll hear it called? You can think of it like a modern-day power hub. Instead of just letting developers pop up wind or solar farms wherever they want, kind of piecemeal, this plan says, okay, let's identify the absolute best spots for wind and sun. By doing that, the state can focus all the new infrastructure, the poles, the wires, in one area, coordinate all the investment, and, really plan things out to minimize the impact on local communities and the environment. And that word, focus, is so important here. This plan is not about covering the entire state with wind turbines and solar panels. Not at all. In fact, if you add up all 6 of these proposed REZs, they cover less than 8% of Victoria's total land. So it's a really strategic, very targeted approach. But don't let that small percentage fool you. The scale of what's planned inside these zones is just immense. To give you some perspective, just 1 gigawatt of power can light up hundreds of thousands of homes. And by 2040, this plan is gearing up for almost 10 gigawatts of new onshore wind, almost 9 from solar, and another 9 from offshore wind. That is a staggering amount of new, clean power, and all of it needs to be connected to the grid. So this is basically the new energy map of Victoria. The plan lays out 6 key zones. You've got the Central Highlands, the Southwest, Western Victoria, Northwest, Central North, and Gippsland. Each one was picked for its unique natural resources, whether that's incredible wind or just tons and tons of sunshine. All right, so picking the spots for these energy hubs is one thing, but connecting them all up, that's the real challenge. This is where we get to the nuts and bolts, the actual steel and wire of building out the new grid. The plan breaks down the construction into 7 priority programs. Think of this as the master to-do list. These are the major projects that are going to form the backbone of the entire new grid. Everything from reinforcing the existing network in Western and Eastern Victoria to building brand new lines to handle that huge potential from offshore wind. Now, they're not trying to do all of this at once, which is probably a good thing. It's all being staged out over time. They're tackling the most urgent upgrades first. You can see here, 2 of the big programs are set to be done by 2030, another 3 by 2035, and the last 2 by 2040. It's a long-term build. And here's a really important detail. This isn't just about building brand new power lines everywhere. A big part of the plan, about 430 kilometers worth, is focused on upgrading and rebuilding existing lines using corridors that are already there. But of course, to connect these brand new energy zones, some new lines are unavoidable. We're looking at around 380 kilometers of new lines that will need to be built. It's also worth remembering that this plan didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's the result of a really long, multi-step process. From identifying huge areas to investigate, to developing draft zones, looking at all the possible transmission routes, and, this is the crucial part, actually listening to public feedback to help shape the final plan.
Okay, so that's the big picture. We've got the problem, we've got the solution with these new energy zones, and we've got a plan to build it. But what does all this mean for you, for the people who actually live and work in Victoria?
Let's start with the people who are right at the heart of this change. We're talking about the regional communities and the landholders who live in and around these new renewable energy zones. Now, this part of the plan is absolutely critical. First off, and this is a big one, landholders have the right to say no to hosting a new wind or solar farm on their property. It's their choice. For those who do decide to host a project, there's financial compensation that gets negotiated. But it's not just about individual payments. The plan also creates these new RES community energy funds, which are designed to make sure the entire local community sees a benefit through local projects and development. And on top of that, there are new benefit arrangements being set up specifically for people who are significantly affected by the new transmission lines. The plan also makes it very clear that Victoria's traditional owners are essential partners in this whole process. And it includes some really specific commitments to make sure this transition is done respectfully. The whole approach is built around two key ideas: partnership and self-determination. The goal is to give traditional owners direct control over how dedicated benefit funds are used in their communities. It's also about maintaining a constant conversation to minimize any impacts to country and to protect cultural heritage. The plan is also pretty upfront in acknowledging that more work needs to be done to make sure this process is genuinely led by traditional owners. Okay, so what about the other side of the coin? The industry and the developers, the companies that are actually going to build all this stuff. What does the plan mean for them? For industry, this all comes down to one word: certainty. This plan basically gives them a clear roadmap. It tells them this is where you should invest, this is where we want the development to happen. It gives them streamlined access to the grid inside these zones, which is a massive green light for investment. But, and this is a big but, in return, the government sets really clear expectations for how these companies have to engage with communities and share the benefits of their projects. So, what's next? Well, this plan is a huge milestone for sure, but it is not the final word. Each one of these 6 proposed REZs now has to go through its own formal declaration process. And that process will include even more chances for the public to have their say, so the conversation is definitely still ongoing. When you step back and look at it, this whole plan is about so much more than just poles and wires. It's literally redrawing the energy map of Victoria. It's a blueprint for a system that's not just built for the next 5 or 10 years, but for the next generation. Which leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? What kind of legacy will this new grid really mean for them?